Leela, a pregnant German shepherd, had been living in the shadows for what seemed like an eternity. Her coat, once thick and shiny, was now matted and patchy, dull from the harsh conditions she had endured. The streets had been her home for months, maybe longer. No one knew for sure. She had been spotted wandering near an abandoned building on the outskirts of town, weak, hungry, and clearly in distress. Her ribs showed through her fur, and her swollen belly indicated the pups she carried, puppies who would be born into a world that had already abandoned their mother. The call to the shelter came from a concerned passerby who had seen Leela sitting by the side of the road, looking more defeated than the stray dogs who usually roamed the area. The passerby had stopped, unable to ignore the deep sadness in the dog's eyes. They couldn't leave her out there to fend for herself, so they called for help. The shelter, already overwhelmed with a constant flow of animals, didn't hesitate to respond. When Leela arrived, she was immediately placed in the intake area, where she was examined by the shelter staff. The veterinarian on duty noted that she was clearly malnourished and dehydrated, but there were no signs of injury, aside from the visible exhaustion. Her belly was large, though not yet in active labor. It was clear that Leela had been carrying the weight of her pregnancy for some time, and now, in the quiet of the shelter, she was being counted as just another number in the system. The shelter was full. It always was. There were dogs everywhere, barking, pacing, fighting for attention. But Leela sat silently, her tired eyes scanning her surroundings, searching for something that would bring her comfort. It was as if she had given up on the hope that things could ever be different. Her body was broken, but her spirit was still intact. She looked around at the other dogs, some of whom were barking and jumping with excitement, while others, like her, appeared to have given up. The sounds of the shelter, the frantic energy of so many animals, only added to her sense of hopelessness. The shelter staff wasn't heartless, but they had their hands tied. There were simply too many animals in need and not enough resources to care for them all. The reality was stark. Leela had a week at best before the shelter would have to make the difficult decision to euthanize her. Pregnant dogs were often the hardest to place, and her chances of being adopted were slim. Lila's time was running out, but no one had told her that yet. The days dragged on for Leela in the shelter. The harsh, constant noise of barking dogs and the hum of fluorescent lights seemed to echo through her bones. She spent most of her time lying in the corner of her kennel, her swollen belly rising and falling with each shallow breath. It was clear she wasn't just physically tired, she was emotionally drained. The shelter, though filled with staff who tried their best, had become a place where animals arrived with hope and left with nothing. Leela knew this. It was hard not to. The staff, though kind, were overworked. Every day brought more animals in, many of them with severe conditions or behavioral issues that required immediate attention. Leela was just one of many, and though her pregnancy made her situation more urgent, there was little anyone could do to change her fate. The shelter's policies were strict, and space was limited. Every kennel was full, and there was always someone on the waiting list for the next available spot. The clock was ticking. A quiet, unspoken countdown had begun for Leela. The shelter had a policy of euthanizing animals that weren't adopted or fostered within a certain time frame. Pregnant dogs like her had even less of a chance. While her belly grew heavy with the pups that would soon enter the world, Leela's future seemed almost non-existent. She wasn't a puppy anymore, and her chances of being adopted were slim. Especially in a place like this, where people often overlooked the older, less flashy animals. The shelter manager, a woman named Emily, walked past Leela's kennel every morning. She saw the sorrow in the dog's eyes and made a mental note to check on her later, but the responsibilities of the day quickly overtook her. There were always more pressing matters, injured animals that needed immediate care, adoption events to organize, phone calls to answer. Emily had grown used to the cycle of life and death within the shelter's walls. It was a rhythm she couldn't change, no matter how hard she tried. On the fourth day of Leela's stay, Emily walked past her kennel again, her thoughts distracted by another task. But something stopped her. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Layla's gaze, usually hollow and resigned, was now filled with something else, something that made Emily pause. It wasn't just the sorrow or the defeat, it was something deeper. It was as if Leela was asking for help, her gaze reaching out in a way Emily had never seen before. Emily knew what was coming. She had seen this before. The euthanasia list would be prepared at the end of the week, and unless someone intervened, Leela's time would run out. The days were growing colder, and the shelter's noise had begun to feel like a constant hum in the background of Leela's life. Despite her exhaustion, she still managed to lift her head whenever someone passed by her kennel. She watched, not with the eager excitement of a dog hoping for attention, but with the kind of quiet desperation that comes from knowing how fleeting every moment might be. Leela knew the clock was ticking, and it felt as if time was slipping through her paws, just like sand through an hourglass. Then, one evening, a volunteer named Marcy walked into the shelter for her shift. Marcy was new to the shelter, having only started a few weeks ago. She was still learning the ropes, adjusting to the routines, and getting to know the animals. As she made her way down the aisles of kennels, checking on each dog, she came across Leela's. She had seen the German Shepherd a few times already, but tonight something felt different. Leela was lying quietly in the back corner of her kennel, her belly heavy with the promise of new life. Her eyes, though usually dull and tired, seemed to pierce the still air. They were filled with an unspoken sadness, too profound to ignore. Marcy felt a lump form in her throat as she knelt down beside the kennel, reaching her hand through the bars, but not quite touching the dog. She wasn't sure what to say, or if she even should say anything. It was as if Leela's silence spoke volumes. For a long moment, neither of them moved, and then something unexpected happened. Leela, who had barely reacted to any other person, slowly stood up. Her body moved with a certain heaviness, as if every step was a struggle, but her eyes remained locked on Marcy's. And then, as if the world had quieted around them, a single tear rolled down Layla's face. Marcy froze. She wasn't sure if it was a trick of the light, or if the tear was real, but there was no denying the emotion in Leela's gaze. It was as if, in that fleeting moment, Leela was reaching out to her, asking for help. Her tears weren't just a sign of physical exhaustion. They were the manifestation of something deeper. A silent plea for one more chance. Marcy's heart twisted. She had seen sad dogs before, but this was different. Layla wasn't just tired. She was defeated, and yet there was something about her that begged to be saved. As Marcy stood there, staring into those eyes, she realized that this wasn't just a dog in need. It was a soul that still held on to hope. Marcy didn't know it yet, but in that single moment, her life was about to change forever. Marcy couldn't shake the image of Leela's tear-filled eyes. It haunted her every time she closed her eyes, and even in the silence of her apartment, the memory lingered. She had worked with animals for years, but something about this German Shepherd, this mother-to-be, was different. The desperation in Leela's gaze wasn't just from physical pain or hunger. It was as if the dog had been abandoned by the world, left with nothing but the weight of her impending motherhood. And in that moment, Leela's silent plea had cut through Marcy's heart in a way no other animals had. That evening after her shift ended, Marcy sat in her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she stared out into the darkened parking lot. The shelter was just a few blocks away, and she knew that the decision had already been made. Leela had only a few days left. If no one came to claim her, to give her a chance at life, she would be put down. But Marcy couldn't accept that. She couldn't simply walk away and pretend like everything was fine when there was a living creature, one with so much potential, just waiting to be saved. The drive home felt endless. Marcy kept thinking about the dogs she had worked with before, all of them with their own stories and struggles. Yet Leela was different. She had a quiet strength, a deep sense of longing that no one seemed to understand. The moment she stepped through her front door, Marcy pulled out her phone and called the shelter. Her hands shook slightly as she dialed the number, the weight of the decision bearing down on her. It rang twice before someone picked up. "Hello, this is Emily. How can I help you?" "Hi, this is Marcy. I'm calling about Leela, the pregnant German Shepherd. I want to foster her," Marcy said, her voice steady but filled with a sense of urgency. "I know it's short notice, but please, I can't let her be put down. Not without a chance." There was a long pause on the other end. Emily, the shelter manager, was silent, probably caught off guard by the sudden request. Marcy could almost hear her thoughts, weighing the decision. The shelter had so many dogs and so few resources. But then Emily spoke. "I'll make the arrangements. I'll prepare the paperwork. Thank you, Marcy." Relief washed over Marcy, but it was quickly replaced with a sense of responsibility. She was about to take on a challenge, and she couldn't fail Leela. This dog, this mother, deserved to see her puppies born in a safe place, away from the harshness of the shelter. And Marcy had just promised to be that place. As she hung up the phone, Marcy sat back in her chair, a deep breath escaping her. She had just made a promise, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was doing something that truly mattered. The first night in Marcy's home was a quiet one. Leela settled into the corner of the guest room, her eyes darting nervously around her new environment. It was small and cozy, a stark contrast to the cold, bustling shelter. But Leela's exhaustion was palpable, and after a brief moment of hesitation, she curled up on the soft bed Marcy had prepared for her. Despite the warmth and comfort surrounding her, the German Shepherd lay motionless, as if her body and mind needed time to catch up with the sudden change in her circumstances. Marcy stayed close, quietly observing Leela from a distance, trying not to overwhelm her. She knew that Leela needed space, but the bond they had started to form earlier in the shelter seemed to be growing stronger. The dog's eyes softened as she glanced over at Marcy, but she remained guarded, unsure if she could trust the kindness that was being offered to her. 2 days passed. Leela seemed to grow calmer, but she still hadn't shown any signs of labor. Marcy began to wonder if the stress of the shelter, combined with the long journey to her new home, had delayed things. She kept a close eye on Leela, making sure she had enough food and water, but still, the tension in the air was palpable. Then, in the early hours of the third morning, it happened. Lila's breathing grew more erratic, and she shifted restlessly in her bed. Marcy, who had barely slept, rose to her feet and moved toward the dog, kneeling beside her. She placed a gentle hand on Leela's side, and the dog looked up, her eyes wide with alarm, but there was no fear, only the instinct to push through the pain. Marcy was ready. She had read the books, watched videos, and prepared herself for what was to come, but nothing could have prepared her for the realness of the situation. Leela began to whimper softly, and Marcy remained calm, speaking in soothing tones as she gently guided her through the process. Hours passed as Leela labored, each contraction leaving her panting in exhaustion. Marcy stayed by her side the whole time, offering water, rubbing her back, and comforting her between each wave of pain. She had read that a dog's instinct to give birth could be an overwhelming experience, but seeing it firsthand left Marcy in awe of Leela's strength. Then, at last, the first puppy emerged, a tiny, squirming ball of fur. Leela immediately licked it clean, nudging it toward her chest with determination. Marcy held her breath, knowing this was just the beginning. One by one, more puppies arrived, each more precious than the last. 8 tiny bundles of life, each one born into the safety of Leela's love and Marcy's promise. As Leela settled in to nurse her newborn pups, a soft sense of peace filled the room. The world outside seemed to fade, leaving only the quiet sound of puppies suckling and Leela's contented sighs. In that moment, it was clear to Marcy. Lila's journey had just begun, and so had her own. The first few weeks after the birth were a blur of puppies, sleepless nights, and tender moments. Layla's transformation was nothing short of extraordinary. The once defeated and broken dog, who had arrived at the shelter with a defeated look in her eyes, was now a proud, nurturing mother. She cared for her puppies with an intensity that Marcy couldn't help but admire. Leela, who had once been abandoned and lost, was now giving everything she had to ensure her pups would thrive. As the puppies grew stronger and more playful, Marcy began to think about what would happen next. She couldn't keep them all, much as she wished she could. But she was determined to find them good homes, families who would love them as much as Leela had loved them. And so, Marcy turned to social media, hoping that the right people would see the story she had begun to share. With each post, Marcy included pictures of Leela and her puppies, detailing the journey they had been through together. She shared the story of how Leela had been on the brink of death, about how her tear-filled eyes had sparked something in Marcy that she couldn't ignore. She didn't just want to find homes for these puppies. She wanted people to understand that Layla's journey wasn't just about survival. It was about love, about resilience, and about the unspoken bond that could exist between a human and an animal. The response was overwhelming. People from all over the country reached out, sending messages of support and offering to adopt the puppies. But what surprised Marcy the most was how many people were touched by Layla's story. Messages poured in not just from potential adopters, but from others who had experienced similar situations with their own rescues. They shared their own stories of animals who had been saved from dire circumstances and how these animals had transformed their lives. For the first time, Marcy realized that Leela wasn't just changing her own life, she was inspiring others to take action. Her story had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always a chance for redemption. Soon, the puppies began to find their forever homes, each one going to families who promised to love and cherish them. But as the last of the puppies were adopted, Marcy knew that her own story with Leela wasn't finished yet. Leela had given her the gift of hope, and now it was Marcy's turn to give Lila something in return. Layla's journey wasn't just about finding a new life for her puppies. It was about finding a new life for herself, and that was something that Marcy would never take for granted. The last of the puppies had been adopted, each one going to a loving family, and Marcy felt a bittersweet pang as she watched them leave. The house, once full of playful barks and tiny paws scrambling across the floor, was now quieter. But there was no emptiness in the silence. It was filled with the unspoken bond that had formed between Marcy and Leela. The dog who had once been broken and abandoned was now thriving, stronger than ever. For weeks, Marcy had been searching for the perfect home for Leela, knowing that her time with her foster dog was coming to an end. But finding a home for Leela wasn't as simple as it had been for the puppies. Leela wasn't just another dog. She had a history, a difficult, heartbreaking past, and she had grown so close to Marcy that the thought of her leaving felt almost impossible. Still, Marcy knew that the best thing for Leila was to have a permanent family, one that would give her all the love she deserved. One evening, Marcy received a call from a couple who had seen Leela's story online. They were a retired couple, recently empty nesters, looking for a companion after losing their beloved dog a year earlier. They had a large backyard, plenty of space, and a deep love for dogs. After several phone calls and an initial meeting, Marcy arranged a home visit. It was clear that the couple adored Leela from the moment they met her, and it didn't take long for Marcy to realize that this couple was the perfect match. But Leela was hesitant. She had come so far, and the idea of leaving the woman who had saved her and cared for her through it all was terrifying. Marcy, sensing Leela's unease, knelt down beside her. "I know, sweet girl," she whispered, brushing her hand through Lila's fur. "You've been through so much, but this is a good place for you. They'll love you. I promise." Leela, as if understanding, placed her head on Marcy's lap, her eyes soft with trust. It was clear that Leela wasn't sure of what the future held, but Marcy could see that she was ready to take the next step. She had healed, and it was time for her to start a new chapter, one where she would never be abandoned again. As the couple took Leela home, Marcy watched them drive off with the dog she had come to love so deeply. A sense of peace washed over her. She had kept her promise. Leela was safe, loved, and most importantly, had a future. That night, as Marcy sat alone in her now quiet home, she couldn't help but smile. She had saved a life, and in doing so, Leela had saved hers too. Months passed, and life moved forward for both Leela and Marcy. The once quiet house, now fully settled, had a certain warmth to it, despite the absence of the puppies. Marcy often found herself looking back on those early days, the bond she formed with Leela, and the incredible transformation the dog had undergone. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago, Leela had been a broken, homeless animal on the brink of despair. But Leela had proven, time and time again, that she was stronger than anyone could have imagined. She wasn't just a survivor of neglect. She was a testament to the power of love and care, to the idea that even in the darkest of times, a spark of hope could still ignite. And now, as Leela settled into her new life with her adoptive family, it was clear that she had found her place in the world. Marcy stayed in touch with the couple who had adopted Leela. They sent her regular updates, photos of Leela playing in the yard, curled up on the couch, and even one of her proudly carrying a stick in her mouth after a walk. The couple spoke of how Leela had blossomed into a joyful, affectionate dog, her spirit fully revived. And Marcy couldn't have been happier for them or for Leela. Every update felt like a chapter of a book she had helped to write. Leela, once a stray with no future, had found the life she deserved. It was a reminder of the difference that one person and one dog could make. One day, Marcy received a message from the couple, along with a photo of Leela lying in her new favorite spot by the window. The dog's eyes were calm and content, her posture relaxed. She had made the transition. The message read, "Leela is home. Thank you for giving her a chance. She's not just our dog, she's family." The words hit Marcy in a way she hadn't expected. They were simple, but they carried the weight of everything that had happened. Layla was family, not just to the couple, but to Marcy too. She had come into her life as a broken soul, but left as a beautiful reminder of what love, patience, and compassion could do for an animal. Marcy had not only saved Leela, but Leela had changed Marcy too. In the quiet moments, Marcy still thought about the dog she had saved. She knew Leela would never forget what had been done for her, just as she would never forget Leela's unwavering trust. Their journey had been one of healing, of learning to love again, and of finding joy in the most unexpected places. As Marcy looked out the window, she smiled, knowing that Leela's story was one of redemption and new beginnings, and that was something to celebrate.